an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Elder Empire series. Book 3-ish, depending, of Darkness and Dawn. Chapters 3, 4, and 5. In these chapters, well, thankfully, Shera's client did not die, and there is a very talented escape attempt that winds up just having to be, undone, and it was like burning a work of art. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat to join us and feed me information for things that I will likely have forgotten because of time. And these are some pretty fun ones. I keep forgetting about the way that this series is written, and that is to say, we have some time in the present, and then we go back and we find out some more of what happened previously. And what I find interesting about writing this way is that you have to really have a handle on what's going to be coming, not just in your own book, but in later books as well, because you have to know exactly what is safe to share right now so that you don't either wind up boxing yourself in a later book without having realized you've done it, which I guess you could just do and roll with and do your best. Or you could accidentally sort of undermine something, and this is why a lot of people have beta readers to catch that sort of thing. But if you are just starting out, as for example I would be, I don't have a lot of people that I feel like would be willing to read just as a volunteer. So not everybody's going to have the luxury of beta readers in that sense, other than a couple of close friends. But yeah, the fact that this is written this way, I just have to assume Will had a full plan for this series already, and that's not to say that every detail was planned out ahead of time. But I think that he had some broad strokes and knew exactly how he wanted to structure this. And I have such mixed feelings about it because part of me really likes this kind of writing style because it drips information about a character's past in a way that isn't just exposition. It's not just info dumping where, she just happens to be asked about whether she has any brothers or sisters by somebody at an inn. And now we're in a flashback kind of thing where she's talking about them because somebody asked. No, it's there was a specific story that happened then that is worth its own focus. So we're going to bounce back and forth because it deserves to be told in this full sense, which makes them feel like a much more complete character in the present, because we know they've been dealing with some shit for a minute now, On the other hand, I have this instinctive reaction that I think a lot of people would relate to, where I get so into what's happening in the present, and then it'll say 6 years ago, and I'm just come on, no, just give me more of the thing right now. And it's so it's not a well thought out rational response, because if he were to just give me all of right now immediately without the context of going back, it would not mean anything to me, that's the thing with this point of this kind of storytelling, is things from the past becoming relevant in the present in some sort of way. So if you just hit the relevance without the context, of course it doesn't work. That does not change the fact that I still just go, no. And it's not even I just want the present. It's whatever time I'm in, I only want that one. And when it stops and moves, I just get annoyed. It could be the past or the present. It doesn't matter. So all that to say, I recognize the value of this kind of storytelling. And I think the very fact that I have that sort of reaction means that it works really well. If you are constantly mad that you're being pulled out of the story you've just been brought into, that means the story you've just been brought into is compelling and gripping. And that means that you really are pulling off something well. But I do have this kind of up and down of frustration and anxiety while I'm reading this. And I just wanted to share because it's there's so many layers to what's happening here. And, we've even gotten the POVs of other characters mixed into the present. So there's just a ton. And, yeah, Dan says it's really almost like 2 full stories in the same book for each character. Yeah, it's it's wild. 2 stories per book and then 2 books per trilogy. I just, I'm not trying to say that Will's the very first person who's done this, but I haven't come across it before. And it is a really, there has to be so much backstory and so much world building in order to make that feel like it's worth your time. And I'm just impressed. I just am, because Lord knows there have been some books that decide to go this deep, and I'm just there was no reason for that. I didn't care about it, and it wasn't relevant. So you just kind of did that to jerk off. I'm looking at you, Stephen King. Anyway, okay. So, chapter 3. We go 10 years ago again. And Shera gets abducted from her bed. And I love that later on, she's like, oh, it wasn't a nightmare scenario. It was just a couple of guys who had kidnapped her from her bed and put a bag over her head. That's fine. She could deal with that. And I was like, man, I wish I could have that kind of reaction. I am right now. Owen is visiting my friend Cam, who is one of the co-hosts on Unspoiled. She is moving, but she is disabled. So he went to help her move. So I'm in the house alone. Yesterday afternoon he left. I was home alone last night. I will be for the next 2 nights. He comes home Monday morning. And I cannot tell y'all how different every noise in the house hits when he isn't home. It's if you have cats versus not having cats. And if you are in a place without cats and there's a weird noise, it gets your attention more. Because normally you can just put it down to, oh, that was probably just the cats. Unless the cat's in the room next to you and you see that is not possible. But with Owen, anytime that there's a sound outside or a weird sort of shuffling or anything, I'm just oh, that's probably Owen doing something. And I couldn't get over how completely out of I would be in the zone watching something, reading something, and then there would just be the sound of the door creaking, and it was just caught in the wind. It hadn't closed all the way. My outside, but I freaked out. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. So anyway, the fact that Shera is just oh yeah, they just busted into my room and took me with whatever, it's fine. And granted, there's so much given to us about the way that she's interpreting the information, of the way she was taken, the sounds around her, the sounds that are coming off of the men who have taken her themselves, how much noise they're making when they walk. Can she hear them breathing? Is there the sound of rustling of trees? Is there the sound of the sea? Is there she hears footsteps at one point and is just oh, okay. So they grabbed her when and are pulling her through a place where it is possible somebody would stumble across them. So that means they don't really feel threatened by the idea of being caught. All of this gives her a lot of info. Nevertheless, I was just really jealous of being able to be that cavalier about your situation. What is that like? So it turns out she tries to fight them. There's a whole thing. Eventually, it's clear that these people, while she caught them off guard a little bit, they still do know what they're doing, and they have a hold of her. They aren't allowed to kill her because the knife pulls back when she sort of pushes her body toward it. And then one of them finally says something, and the whole thing here is that Yala sent him. Yala is somebody that I hadn't thought of in a minute. And this shady bitch, I really like her as a character. Like, she's compelling. But I also get so frustrated by her attitude. She just seems like a person who is certain that they are smarter than everyone else in the room. And I think Yala's smart, but not like that. And she just doesn't really seem to she doesn't really seem to have an accurate grasp of her own capacity. I'll say that. So she gets brought in, and this is such a weird, the way that this is described. They descended a short staircase. Muffled grunts indicated one of the men was opening a heavy door, and only a few seconds later, the three passed through it. They stepped into a cool chamber that smelled of fresh water, even through the hood. The room was filled with soft trickling as of a nearby creek and the distant scrape of stone. And they pull the hood off, and it says there were only a pair of rough torches. In the middle of the room floated a square island of stone tiles. This island was surrounded by a shallow river, which flowed sluggishly against the walls. The water had to enter and exit somewhere, but Shera couldn't see any openings in the stone. The surface of the river looked black in the reflected firelight. Above her, a stone arm rotated slowly in the ceiling like the hand of an ancient clock. Its slow orbit mirrored the flow of the water below. It looked like it should cause a grinding noise that would deafen any other sound, but it was surprisingly quiet. It left only a distant rasp as it passed. Shera and her two captors stood on a bridge leading straight to Yala, who stood in the center of that artificial island. And then she was flanked by 4 architects dressed in the expensive blacks of their order. One woman wore a black dress and painted wooden mask, an old rag clutched tight in her left hand. I will tell you, I got a little bit nervous about that. An old rag clutched tight in her left hand felt really familiar to the woman who killed the other regent. I can't remember what his name was. The other wore a black and white top with a long black skirt, a pair of eyeglasses, and 2 heavy metal gauntlets that looked like they'd come from Aluminium Night. The men wore black suits in subtly different styles, one carrying what looked like a toolbox, the other a ball of yarn. And they wind up going out to the edges, going right through the water, and they put their hands against the wall. And what it turns out this is a room specifically designed to disperse intent. She says it disperses it, driving it to the edges of the room where the flowing water carries it away. One of the male readers coughed without looking away. That's not entirely... I don't care. I also brought a team of my readers along to scrub us clean. Even the Emperor won't hear anything we say tonight unless you tell him. This is super fascinating to me. This guy isn't arguing with her that their intent will be wiped away. He is just arguing about how it works. And one, I want to know. I really want to know. Well, if it doesn't work like that, which sounded completely like that. When she gave me the explanation, I was like, no, that doesn't sound like a thing that would work. So I was really appreciating that he steps in and is kind of like, hey, so no, but, and so if it doesn't, then what's the deal? Because it doesn't feel like intent is just loose in the air unless it gets to attach to something. Like the idea of it just being moved to the outer edges and washed away, that doesn't sound like how intent would work. So yeah, I want to know more about that, a great deal more. And then the fact that what she asks is, so the Emperor wants you to kill him, huh? And she tries for a second before she knows what the point of the room is. Shera's just like, I can't discuss, that is privileged information. Until Yala explains. And then she's like, oh, okay, well then yes, he wants me to kill him. And Yala unexpectedly is like, cool, yes, do that. Actually sooner than he thinks you should. And what I found pretty remarkable here is that it's not even, like, while her reaction is surprising to Shera initially, it isn't like I'm surprised at the fact that she would want it once she stops to think about it. It's just like, oh, I thought that she was just going to, like, put up a fight here. But now that I think about it, yeah, it really would benefit her, actually, if everything were to go to fuck. So I guess this all fucking falls into the category of logical but shitty. And that, for me, is pretty impressive, that she has the presence of mind to really stop and be like, wait, why would you... Oh, money. Okay, yes, that's tracking. So, then let's see. You can wait, though. Why does it matter if the Emperor dies tomorrow or in 10 years? We expect that it will take you another year or two. We're not demanding unnecessary haste so long as you eliminate him before he's ready. That must be the crucial point. Shera didn't know what Yala thought the Emperor would do if he had time to prepare, but there had to be something. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter if she waited. There would be a specific threat, or Yala would have responded differently. Shera didn't mind. She didn't need all the answers before she complied with an assignment, but Lucan wouldn't be happy. And she asks, why aren't Lucan and Maya here with me talking about this? And Yala is like, yo, come on. Look, Maya, she would not be able to withstand the reading of the Emperor. There's just no way. Whether or not he'd read it right off her, or she would literally just come out and say it, who knows? But he would figure it out from her. And Lucan would need an entire dossier of every motivation for all of this and our future plan. Like, he would never just comply. We are going to somebody with this who we know is going to fucking listen. And I had to be like, okay, you know what? That, honestly, as much as it's, like, annoying because I'm very much a Lucan, I have to face facts. Sometimes the fact that I ask a lot of questions or argue or whatever does mean that people just don't want to deal with me. And you know what? I think that's probably for the best. So I love this. She says, how do you feel at the thought of driving your dagger into the Emperor's heart? And Shera pictures it in, like, complete detail and then just says nothing in particular. Which is part of why we love her and hate her. We don't hate her. It's more why we love her and are also, like, concerned about her, I think is really the way to say it. So, okay. Chapter 4. We start off with, of the Emperor's 3 surviving companions, Joran is arguably the most interesting. The accomplishments of Esther VI have busied the pens of poets and historians for generations, while Joran's are largely overlooked. Why? And then we hear that he is called Cursebreaker and Maze Walker, and that he has done a ton of research into intent. The only one that is, like, has come close is the Emperor. It was he who created the classification system for curses and malicious intent still in effect today, which is pretty cool. Simply put, we owe the current quality of our lives to Joran before anyone else. Without his influence on the Emperor and the Empire, we might still be crouched in caves burying our crude tools every night for fear of what our intent might birth. I'm sorry, but that sounds awesome. Before they figured intent out, you could, like, do something with a tool, leave it, and whatever crazy shit you had in mind while you were using it could just spontaneously create some kind of creature. Like, is that where elders come from? I mean, that feels unfair. Yeah, I'm glad somebody figured it out. That's all I'm saying, because damn. It's, I don't know, there's, like, something about it that feels akin to a disease and then, like, a person inventing vaccines sort of thing, you know, where it's like, if it hadn't been for that one person, God knows how things would be. So anyway, I'm not getting into a whole vaccine thing right now. I'm not interested. So we go back to the present and the attack where he has just been shot at. The bullet goes through him. He falls back, but he backs in behind this shrub. And he does this, and Shera is watching him, and she has this moment because he tells her, get back. If I open my blade, it will dust anyone in 50 paces. She does not immediately listen to him. Instead, she puts a hand on Cyphron, and she senses what she describes as a river of heat, ending in a well under the bush. And this is one of those things that's so interesting to me because Cyphron, I understand her not wanting to touch it. Yeah. But also, it's doing some things for her that are pretty helpful. And whenever you've got a sort of double-edged sword like this, especially with a person like Shera, who has difficulty with her, connecting with a conscience in a real way anyway, it's just a recipe for problems. So she looks at this, the way it's positioned, the fact that he's behind the only bush that he could possibly get to in time after being shot at. And she's like, oh, fuck. And she grabs him by the collar and hauls him out. Seconds later, the bush and a chunk of the island blasted into the air on a tide of bright blue flame, all chemical munitions. The force slammed into Shera's back, sending her tumbling to the tree line. And basically, this is attempt 2. So she has this moment, and already I'm just like, they literally are blowing their island up. How did they get here to this point? And I guess this sort of answers the question that Shera was having about why is it important for us to keep the island secret and hidden behind this veil of mist? Because then when you have high profile clients, people can just come at you on your turf, which granted, you're going to have an advantage because it's your turf, but you don't want to set that precedent that people can't even come to the island because folks are going to know and be there waiting for them or ready for them after they arrive or whatever. And also, the more they decide to do this, the more they could potentially fuck with your home turf so that it just doesn't begin to be as familiar anymore, and thus your advantage is gone. So yeah, this felt extremely rude. So let's see. Rather than pursuing the attacker, Cyphron was focused entirely on Joran's weakness. This thing, I swear to God. And Shera is just laying there for a second, thinking, okay, I'm going to collect myself. We're going to get up. Everything will be fine. And then all of a sudden she's like, oh, no. There are always 3 attempts. And depending on the importance of the client, the expectation from consultants is that they give their lives to make sure that the objective is carried out, whether, depending, excuse me. For instance, advanced planning wouldn't have helped her. Who would have predicted the assassination of a regent under consultant protection? Only quick reactions would help Joran survive the next few seconds. After that, he could take care of himself. So she feels the presence of the assassin moving closer, and she is just really impressed because as much as she can feel them coming closer, none of that has to do with her regular senses, which are not picking up anything. And she's like, wow, if Cyphron weren't what it was, I wouldn't know they were there, which is concerning. She limped into the woods, forcing down the aches in her muscles, placed each foot slowly and carefully, so it was almost a full minute before she spotted a silhouette, readying a pistol and leaning out of cover for a shot. Shera left her spear where it was, pulling a poisoned needle from the pouch on her belt. They were non-lethal, alchemically prepared needles tipped with a paralytic, and they would keep him alive to be questioned. So she launches this thing, and he pulls the trigger, and I kind of thought maybe he'd have wound up accidentally getting his target, even though she had, pinned him. It was perhaps going to be Will's intent to make me feel comfortable thinking, oh, Shera won. And then her turning around and realizing that last wild shot actually got the client between the eyes, but thankfully, no. And let's see. So this is our little jackknife, Jorn said. He didn't seem too alarmed for a man who had just survived an assassination attempt. Is he one of yours, Shera? And he's wearing black, but she's like, yeah, this isn't the right kind of black. No. And also, he would have won if he were one of mine. And I'm not entirely certain of that. She seems to take pride in saying that, and I'm not trying to take that away from her, but we know that Shera is very, very good. And I don't, I suppose what she's thinking is probably, if it were one of hers, they would know what she's capable of, and they would have sent people who had the kind of abilities that would be able to stack against hers. But for me, my immediate response to this mentally was just yeah, but you're really tough and badass, so I don't know. So she rolls him over, and his eyes widen, and he says, Shera? And then all of a sudden she realizes who he is. And it turns out that he was with that gang that she was being raised with at the beginning of the first of her books. And what it looks like is that this dude is either back at it and has started to reconvene the kind of gang, or I can't remember. He does get away, right? At the beginning of the first book. So either he's doing this or somebody has tapped into whatever it is he started to create. But I think that the assumption is he is behind this somehow. So this is when we go to the council chambers, and there is a whole oh, George says we see Shera kill him. I didn't remember that. Thank you, George. So it would have to be somebody either starting his work again, or somebody who had maybe been one of them and is calling in some colleagues to work on this. I don't know. So this is when Kieran is talking to all of the counselors about what happened that day. And somebody keeps on interrupting her. And at one point, she gets this smile that I really like. Shera recognizes the smile as the one that she has when she's imagining knifing someone, which you just gotta love knowing somebody well enough to be able to tell something like that. You may take that up with her yourself if you feel so strongly. May I present Shera of the Gardeners? And Shera stood up. This guy talked from this alcove in this room that is meant to allow anonymity when people speak. But the thing is, it doesn't. It's intense. The intent is there, but it's actually fairly easy to zero in on who's talking. So she turns and looks at him and puts her hand on the hilt, and he just is no, that's fine. And I love this. She just keeps staring at him. He shuffles and sort of moves so that she can zero in even more. And the guy is clearly deeply uncomfortable. So we were able to identify him as one Gerald Harris, son of a banker and a musician in the capital. He no longer answers to that name. However, he answers only to Benji. Alone, his new name means nothing. That it sounds like a traditional consultant name could be nothing more than a coincidence, but Shera has information that leads us to suspect something more. And this is when she steps forward and says, I was held by Rudius Maxwell. He was called the Gladstone Kidnapper. And he trained a bunch of kids that he kidnapped from the park to be killers. And Benji was one of them. And I really like, she thinks for a second about how she should say he trained us to be killers, but she's like, he didn't. No, that was the consultants, the gardeners. That is who gets credit for what I am. And I was like, I kind of enjoy that, taking that away from him, because he would most certainly be trying to take credit for Shera and how good she is. That is just like, you know. Maxwell's plan was ended when the parents of the missing children hired us. This is Carrion, right? I led the mission myself, where we recovered most of the survivors. As a direct result of our actions that day, Maxwell himself was killed. All true, technically. So that's what that means, because I had forgotten that Shera was the one who killed him. And we checked the miners' records for all 48 individuals. Of the 29 children in the care of their parents, 5 had been confirmed with their families in the past year. 2 are dead in ordinary circumstances. 3 reside in imperial prisons. 6 have started their own families, and the remaining 13 are missing. Of the 19 we remanded to the Luminians, we cannot account for a single one. And somebody is just like, well, they wouldn't lose a bunch of children. They should have been very, very safe with them. And Yala says they were until the Emperor's death. So this is when Shera feels guilty. And I am trying to understand exactly what this means, because I guess what Yala is saying is that while things were stable, they were safe because nobody had a use for them. But then once things began to be upended, they were in a position to be like utilized in a way that kind of Shera being the one to have killed the Emperor, she feels responsible for the fact that they could have been seen as tools again after everything. Now, it's sort of like, I'm not entirely certain of that explanation. That's what I'm sort of putting together. But I can't help but imagine that there was ways that they would have used these kids even when the Emperor was dead. I don't know. Maybe there really wasn't. Maybe, I don't know. But it just seems like if you have these kinds of kids with these kinds of abilities and this training, people are going to find ways to exploit that. Even if there isn't a huge throne to be gained from it, there's still something to be gained. You know, there's always something. People are greedy for a lot of petty little things. So I don't know, unless it's supposed to be that the people who were in custody of the children would have been able to protect them if there weren't a large joint interest amongst several people. But I may not be intended to understand this here. It may just be the beginnings of an explanation. So yeah, I felt like this was interesting, and this is brought up a little bit later about how she has this very specific kind of conscience. It's not like killing people doesn't bother Shera. It's like what kind of suffering she causes and who is doing the suffering. That is something that really seems to click with her a lot more. The ending of a life, not the same. And it all, of course, sort of boils down to whether people are close to her or mean something to her personally in any way. And even the Emperor, who she has started to sort of the idea of killing him, apparently that doesn't particularly move her either. So, you know, George says, I thought it just meant that the chaos from the Emperor dying made it able for them to lose them. Oh, so just, it wasn't because of how they could be used, but simply the upheaval of everything just caused enough confusion that people who would normally be under careful watch are going to be just sort of allowed to roam and disappear or get abducted or whatever. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. That's fair. So, let's see. Ultimately, the fault lies with whomever or whatever killed the emperor. I hate this because she fucking is talking to Shera. She knows exactly. I mean, ew. It's just, I don't like her. Look, I just don't like her. But that does not excuse them from responsibility. If the enemy is raising a gang of children into a lesser copy of the Gardeners, the problem falls to the Luminians to solve. And somebody is like, well, they're our allies, though. So if something is to happen, we do still need their support. And she says, if matters continue the way they are, the Empire will fall apart with no assistance from us. The Imperialist guilds have selected a replacement for the Emperor, and I assure you he is entirely unsuited to long-term rule. So this was what I thought was sort of interesting as well, that she is being pretty open with like their intentions here with letting things dissolve into chaos and choosing leaders who are not appropriate. And I really thought that was going to be something that really stayed with her and maybe a couple people, not something that she would talk about pretty openly with everybody. The Luminians are surrounded by hostile forces on the mainland, as are their allies. But they also remain responsible for the creation of a band of assassins in the hands of the Imperialists. The High Council is unanimous in proposing that we send a team to the Luminian Order to assist and guide them in uprooting these assassins. And I love this. Yala elbows Tyrell in the ribs, who just wakes, says unanimous, and then falls asleep again almost immediately. And Shera is just like, wow, what a bro. That was really tight. So the operation would have to be meticulously thorough, should be carried out with absolute secrecy to avoid open war. We hereby ask the architects at large to vote. Should a team of gardeners go aid the Luminian Order, yay or nay? And Shera just gets up and walks out because she knows exactly how the vote's going to go and she knows who's going to be sent. This is when we go to Lucan. Lucan is working on some stuff to escape, which is a very different mindset than he last had when we came upon him locked up. In the past, he has been sort of content to treat his time as an opportunity for research and learning and connecting with his power and various things. But he apparently, Shera's talk of escape just really got into his head more than it had. And he has been working on making weapons. What are they? Spades, they're called? Yeah. The collection of sharp rocks and broken seashells is more than just a pile of junk. He has saved them desperately, carrying them from the wreckage of his previous cell, hoarding them as they blow in on the wind. Now he practices with them every day as the guard changes, and every night when they think him asleep. He considers them his secret weapons, and so they have become more than what they once were. After months of being thrown by a gardener, they are stronger, sharper, deadlier. They're practically spades. So he is testing these out and is just like, all right, this is working pretty well. He's made a little bag to hold them in. And then a quick lamp, which apparently, because it is something dangerous, it is examined before and after it's handed to him to make sure that he can't be stockpiling the fuel in it, to make sure that it doesn't have any cracks. And it says it passes inspection because it was meant to. Its housing will weaken only to Lucan's hand, tearing as soon as he pulls on it. To anyone else, it is solid iron. Which, that just, again, his skill is pretty wild, what he can do. Just, oh yeah, well, it'll fall apart, but only for me. Wow. I love it. Good for you, Lucan. He's just very creative with this. So only today was he confident that the quick lamp would really come free when he grabbed it, which meant that he was ready to escape. He'd resisted the idea for years out of his attachment to the Consultants Guild. If he gave in to Shera's temptation and left his imprisonment, he'd be declaring himself an enemy of the entire guild. Besides, he'd always harbored a dream of steering the consultants from within, and he couldn't do that if he abandoned them. And then the handmaiden attacked. And he is noticing the way all of this has gone down and the way that it has affected Shera. Shera had become a soulbound that day thanks to him. He was one of the few people with the power to help guide the future. How could he help from inside a cell? It was clear that he couldn't, and all he needed was Shera. And then she shows up, and him, thinking that this is the perfect opportunity, he doesn't even say anything to her before he does it. He just says, I have a present for you, and then just dissolves the door. This is after, by the way, Shera knocks out the guard with a needle, because she is just doing that all the time. And it's such a shame, because like I said, you guys, what he has done here is so cool and has taken so much work, and then he just has to undo it. And I just feel for him a lot. So he sees the guard is unconscious, and that's really what spurs him at this point. He's just like, well, there's not going to be a better time to do this. So he says, I got you a present. We're getting out of here. The door turns into nothing but sawdust because he has talked it into something. What better way to keep me out of sight than to open and let me go? I will leave and the cell will be empty. Nothing to see. Nothing to upset the jailer. That should satisfy the prisoner's desire for freedom, Lucan's own intention to see Shera, and even the cell's mission to contain dangerous forces. If the cell was empty, there was nothing to contain. Its purpose was fulfilled. The reasoning was a stretch, and probably not enough to awaken the door. But fortunately, active reading was only somewhat related to awakening. Instead of using the intent stored in an object to transform and empower it, Lucan only wanted the physical change. And this is sort of interesting because, that was exactly what I was going to mention. George says this reminds me of the Young Wizard series. And I think I've mentioned that with this. The interactions of readers with objects and determining their desire to be or not be certain things, or the way that they have been taught they should exist, what their purpose is. The Young Wizard series has a similar thing where a refrigerator that doesn't have any food in it will be really sad because it's like, this was what I was made for, to hold food and to feed you. And you're not putting anything in me, and it really bums me out. So this reasoning of the cell's mission is to contain forces, and if it's empty, there's nothing to contain, which means its purpose is fulfilled. That does not work for me. I don't even, and it says the reasoning was a stretch. I don't even think the reasoning makes sense at all. I will just say the reasoning isn't just a stretch. I feel like the reasoning straight up doesn't work. But whatever. It's really not that important. I'm just saying. So he dissolves the door, and then he sprints forward and is like, let's go. And it takes him a minute before he realizes that she hasn't moved. And when he turns around, she's got this shocked expression, and she's like, can we talk about this first? And he's like, we really shouldn't, right now, no. And then she looks at him with this pleading expression. He can't understand. This has been her idea. All she ever did was talk about escaping. And then he finally does it. And it's like the first time she's ever shown any resistance. And he can tell, finally, she says, I have orders from the High Council. One of the regents has been killed. And Jorn would have been too. So he asks witch regent. And I love that he thinks, I hope it wasn't Esther 6, and then immediately, oh no, of course it wasn't Esther 6. Esther 6, like, the things I've heard about her, and I suspect most of them are true, that would be very, very difficult. So he can tell that there is something more here. And this is when she brings up that she knew the guy who attacked Jordan. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, fuck. Oh, this is really going to touch on her, like, weird code that she lives by that doesn't make a lot of sense to me as somebody who, like, does have a conscience. But I'm glad it's there, that she has some boundaries that she feels anything about, you know? And she says the Luminiums lost them on the night the Emperor died. And as soon as he hears that, he understands why she feels responsible for this. I'm supposed to lead the team. I can't let someone else do it. While she would avoid a job at the slightest excuse, she never left one half done. How does that make you feel? Guilty, she said, surprising him further. Not only had she actually answered him, she actually gave him an answer that shocks him, like the answer itself. Because he didn't think that she really experienced guilt in that way. He asked once if she felt guilty for pushing a woman out a window, and she hadn't remembered doing it. He would have been less surprised to hear that she could breathe underwater. I love this. And she didn't remember doing it. I don't know if that is a conversation that we got to see, but that sounds right to me. Because it really truly is something that is just a to-do list for her. And she's going to, like, just knock people out of the way to get to the thing. And, you know, it's like asking what door you pushed open. Like, did it have a black frame or a brass frame? I don't know. It was a door I walked through. Why would I pay attention to that? You know? I feel responsible for the others. I left them and I never thought to check up. Maybe if I had, I could have helped them, taken them with me. Or I could have killed them before they grew too dangerous. And I love that. She's just like, man, I wish that I could have known in case they really needed to be killed. And Lucan is like, all right, well, maybe it's cool you didn't catch up with them. I had to kill the Emperor. I don't regret it, but now I feel guilty for it anyway. What's wrong with me? And I love that. Look, what's wrong with her is that she's having a very human reaction to a thing. But as much as I want to act like this is funny because it's Shera, I think all of us have been here where we are like, why do I feel this way that's not rational about a thing? When if it were our friend telling us they felt this way, we'd be like, of course you feel that way. Like, that's a totally natural reaction. But when it's us, it feels like, well, other people are irrational. Other people react in a way that really doesn't make any sense. And I can forgive them that. But me, I don't react irrationally. I am 100% rational all the time because I'm super self-aware. And then you have to stop and step back and be like, oh no, I'm just a fucking person. And all of us do this and I'm not special. So yeah, this bit is just like, while a part of me is tempted to be like, lol, she doesn't know what a conscience is and is mystified by what she's feeling. There have been so many instances of me being like, what's wrong with me? And people are like, you're feeling shame. You're feeling like guilt and conflict. This is not surprising. Why are you surprised by it? So he is just sort of like, I don't really get how Algeus was murdered by kids that weren't even full trained gardeners. Like, how did they have the resources even to train for something like that? And he's thinking also about the fact that Cyphrin, because it is healing Shera's body, obviously it's having a physical effect, but he does not know what that is or what it can otherwise affect, you know? And that hadn't occurred to me, and that is a really, really solid point there, Lucan. I'm a bit ashamed of the fact that that hadn't occurred to me, but yikes. You know, I think I just take the healing factor thing at face value, and this is just, you know, there are a lot of things that would have this sort of effect in different stories where it's just like, oh yeah, and you heal from wounds, and that's just, there's no price to be paid for that ability. It is simply a perk that comes with it. But I love that he's like, if it can do that, it can just do things like that. And it opens a different door that's a lot more worrisome and has a lot of other implications. So, yeah, he's realizing she really needs him to like help lead her through this. And he had to help her, and he couldn't do it from in here. That was the biggest force urging him to leave. So, of course, she was determined to stay. And she says that he could come on the mission. And let's see, he might be able to, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where it is. Then get out of here now. I'll go on the mission and say I had nothing to do with your escape. You think they'd believe that? She stared at him, and suddenly she looked a bit more like her normal dead-eyed self. Why should I care what they believe? That was true. She just doesn't have to fucking worry about these rules and regulations and shit the same way. If they can't prove anything, then what are they gonna fucking do? She's extremely valuable and talented, and they know that, and they are not going to fuck with that. So finally, he says, all right, fine. And he shoves the guard out the door, because she had dragged him into the cell so nobody saw him. And he gets to work putting the door back together. And when we go to the guard's POV, it takes a minute for him to like remember what happened. And apparently he saw the door dissolve. He wasn't completely passed out by then. So he has this memory, and he looks at the door that is there now, where the wood grain is just like kind of not right. It doesn't flow the way that it should. And he tells himself, well, I'm knocking on it. It seems like wood. I'm jiggling the handle. It's definitely locked. I guess I just don't remember what this door looked like. Which, I mean, that would probably be the thing most of us would assume, because I don't think it would occur to a lot of us that you could just, like, reform a door out of sawdust. And I'm unclear on how many people can do this, because this feels like kind of a big deal to me, but the powers in this world are so different person to person that I can't quite tell. So yeah, he is startled to see the door is there, Lucan is there, and Lucan says, Shera assures me she'll be gentler next time, and he's like, oh, I cannot stay on this shift. I can't do it. Even if it cost half his pay, he had to get off lunch duty. So, then we go to chapter 5, which is a shorter one. 9 years ago. And the Emperor is trying to train Shera and Maya and Lucan to go up against him. He is trying to teach them how to work together and how to handle him, because he is very much aware that using Nakothi's heart as this power source, as he has been doing, is going to lead to insanity eventually. So this is why he asked her to kill him, and he needs to know that she is going to be up for it, because when he really loses it, he's not going to be holding back at all. He is going to be plowing straight forward, doing whatever he needs to do to get where he has to go. And it is very clear that the team is not up for it. They are just not there yet. And he is getting extremely frustrated over the fact that they are just getting knocked on their asses. They're getting bested. He's faster than them. And I love that he says, for the love of the light. And Geraldus Teach, what's up, is here and says, nobody says that anymore. Ah, I see. What do they say now? Among my soldiers, light and life is fairly common. A classic. I thought you'd like that. Sometimes they like to swear by one elder's name or another, typically Kellerak or Nakothi. I prefer light and life, thank you. I really enjoy this. It's just another bit of the, these regents that are being told, okay, so this is the style now. This is the manner of address now. This is the overall vibe of this century. Just FYI, what you're doing is like played. It's over. It's canceled. So she is like getting up off the floor. Shera has been knocked back, is very tired. Lucan lay nearby. A wool mask was half pulled over his head where the impact to his chin had torn it away. Shera wasn't sure what the mask was invested to do, but she understood it had something to do with hostile intent. It hadn't stopped a punch to the face, she knew that. And I'm really curious what it was supposed to do. I don't recall this being mentioned, if this is like a newer thing or what, but yeah, I have to imagine that if it was something that Lucan had been working on, he probably kept working on it, and that this thing is maybe more effective than it was then at this point if he kept working. Maya twitched as though she were having a fit, clutching at her head with fingers that periodically sprouted claws, then withdrew them. Her blonde hair was matted with blood, and her hunched shoulders writhed under her blacks like a dozen rats wrestling on her skin. Her legs kicked out spasmodically in random directions, and from her mouth issued a series of clicks and grunts that sounded more animal than human. So, of the three of them, it looked like Shera was in the best shape. I cannot with Maya. Maya's whole situation is so upsetting. You guys, it is so disturbing. Every time I'm reminded of like what it is she's dealing with and what was done to her and the reasons that she let it be done, her own feelings of just inadequacy, it is so saddening. And just the pain that she's in and the constant struggle to like keep things under control and the like awareness that there are abilities available, that there's like potential here, and she just can't quite access them yet because she isn't at that level. So it's like within sight, but not within reach. I just really feel for her a lot. Meanwhile, the Emperor is just standing there watching all of this and isn't really reacting to Shera being like, dude, we really do need a break. You can't just keep fucking with us. He comes at Shera and it's like a blur, and he gets her around the throat. She tries to fight back. Like, there's just absolutely no way she's winning this. And she sits down. This is a bold new strategy. And she just says, I can't beat you alone. If I really had to kill you, I would run away and wait for a better time. And he's like, well, that's not always going to be a way you can handle anything. And Shera is just like, I'm telling you what I'm telling you. And somebody is going to get very hurt here if we keep acting like this, if we keep handling it like this. And then Maya attacks Shera. Shera stepped aside from the first rush, driving 2 needles into the side of Maya's neck. See? Hurt. The Emperor waved a hand in her direction. Understood. Take an hour to pull your teammates together. Then meet me back here. We have no more time. So this is interesting because he kept thinking that he had like another 20 years. And now he's starting to be like, yeah, actually, I hear that clock ticking. So it's definitely not that long, actually. And this is interesting to me, the fact that Maya attacked her. It's not clear why, if it was just like the sorts of voices. I want to call them like presences inside Maya. I wonder if they were just like attack literally anybody and she saw Shera and it wasn't really about Shera, or if it was, because we know that she like is jealous of her and kind of threatened by her. And so maybe it was about Shera, or maybe it was just about the fact that like she's not going to attack the Emperor and she just wants to get aggression out. So, you know, Lucan is literally still asleep. She's not going to fight somebody who can't fight back. So she's going to go for somebody that's going to give her a real fight, maybe. So then a messenger comes in. Greyweather. Greyweather is what's-his-face's mom, right? Sorry, guys, to call him what's-his-face. I know that's incredibly disrespectful, but I have just completely like lost track of everybody. So, Calden. Thank you, George. So she shows up and is just like, I was trying to get in there and give you a really important message, and your guards wouldn't let me come in, to which the Emperor is like, good. And then she tells him the message, and he reacts as if this is indeed a fucking emergency. We've lost contact with the city of Silverreach. She didn't get any farther. Teach pushed past her, tearing the door open and bellowing for her Imperial Guard. The Emperor turned his back on the watchman, walking over to the edge of the tower. General Teach turned as the Imperial Guard shouted, "Can you deal with it from here?" He shook his head, expression dark. "Not anymore. I'll have to go in person." And he tells Shera, "Meet at the harbor, pack for a fight. Have them carried if you must." And then he tells Greyweather, "Tell Bliss, I will handle this personally." And he steps off the side of the tower and just disappears. So Greyweather is just like, okay. Because evidently the impact of this is not apparent to her. She's been sent to share a message, and clearly it felt like it was important, but now that she's seeing the way that they have responded to it, she's like, I guess I was undervaluing this threat. Officially, there is nothing in Silverreach, but it was built over an ancient library, the same library where, according to our records, the Emperor once sealed the Great Elder Achtmagut. And his spawns are called Inquisitors. They have many eyes and many arms, and they crawl all over the world to seek and gather knowledge for their master, but they look like spiders. Spiders. Something else her blades could hardly touch. Did we know that? Were we aware that her blades can't deal with spiders? What is that about? Is that because like a big power up came from the like handmaiden who had sort of a spider shape to her, and so it's sort of like self-defensive, or I don't know. So, oh yeah, you're right. George says this is before the blade changed. I forgot that. So then why? George says, I think it's just that she's too weak. Oh, okay. Nehua says, I haven't read this in a while, but I think it's because her blades are better at killing people. Their intent is about killing people. Okay. Interesting. So, Greyweather goes over to Maya to slap her in the face to wake her up. This is just like, I'm not carrying them. They can wake up and they can fucking walk. And that is the end of the chapter, kids. So, yeah, I am very, very excited to see, first of all, how it goes with Shera reconnecting with people from her past, like this far back, you know, after everything that she has been through. And also, I really want to know what she can do with this weapon, if she can dominate it the way she needs to with Lucan's help. So, yeah, a lot to look forward to here. I'm excited to be back in this world. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap. Thank you again very much to George for commissioning this episode. Thank you to all of you for listening. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.